Hello, and welcome back to the sim. In this one, we're jumping back into the TBM. After software update 8, they connected the throttle to a B event, and we haven't been able to make it move very much inside the cockpit. Well, it didn't bother me much, but in the last week there's been about 5 or 6 people who've brought it up, and so finally I thought, okay, I'll show you how to use a vJoy to make it move in the sim so you can still use SPAD.next. So let's go ahead, jump inside, and get into it. So of course what we're talking about here is getting that throttle lever to move, to go into the reverse detent, to come out of it, and to still be able to jump over, go into low, go into cutoff, which you can show you afterwards, come back into high, and come back over the gate and have full control of it. You can see that as I move my throttle, we're now moving it up, going down into the detent for reverse, coming out, and then using that prop lever to move it into high, move it into low, move it back into high, and all the way up to move it back over the gate so we have our throttle. So how do we do this? Well, let's jump into it and I'll show you when we head into SPAD.next. So we're on SPAD.next 9.12.72, getting real close as we're in the beta. That said, this should not require anything of that nature because we are doing things that should already be there. Now first up, you are going to need a vJoy installed. We have other videos that cover this. You download vJoy, you install it. It's a virtual joystick. I've used it in a few different videos to show how to use buttons to link things like cameras and views and stuff that we just don't have easy access to through the SDK. So similarly, we need to do something with an axis. And what you'll see here is that the x-axis doesn't have anything on it because it's actually bound in Microsoft Flight Sim. So we don't actually put anything on this. We're using this as what gets bound to throttle 1 in Microsoft Flight Sim, and then we can bind this joystick axis, so that in direction, similar to how with buttons we showed using a vJoy button for vPilot. That way we could assign it to like 5 different controllers, since vPilot only lets you have 1. So in a way, this is just another way of doing mappings. Instead of taking it completely out of Microsoft Flight Sim, we're putting throttle 1 back into Microsoft Flight Sim, but not directly from a controller. We're doing it from this device. So now that we understand what we're using the vJoy to do, and we'll show the mapping in Microsoft as well, we're going to go ahead and jump into the Bravo programming. So of course I've got throttle number 1 here on the furthest left axis, as you see with the GA throttle lever. And so what we've done there is, well, pretty simple. We added an event and we chose a custom axis. And the reason for the custom axis is we want to rescale this lever from its 0 to 1023, and we want to scale that to 32,767. And so that's just the range of the value of the vJoy. Now normally it's 0 to 16,383, so this is basically double. A lot of axes do it in a minus 16,383 to 16,383 or 384. And again, that's where the difference is here. Instead of being negative 16,383, we're starting at 0. And so that maps into the vJoy perfectly. So then we came to our target. And the key with the target is you're going to a data definition under local, right, under devices, and then we find our vJoy, and then we scroll down past all those buttons we have, and we have all the axes that are available to us. And so there's still a bunch available, and again, if I need more than this, because I decided to set everything up this way, all props, all throttles, everything, keep in mind you can turn on up to like 16 of these vJoys, so you can map them across multiple units. So there you go. We grabbed this as the device. We set to use axis value, but we're actually using the raw rescaled value, so we enabled that. And so by doing this, we're now driving that vJoy axis from this axis. And this is great because, like I said, if I had a other joystick I wanted to apply this to, I could go to the, say, TCA throttle, but now, like we did before, we'd be going to vJoy 1 and we'd be grabbing that X axis. Even when we come back to vJoy 1, we're going to control that same axis. So important was the throttle and getting this motion to move the throttle, but then what was important was making the prop lever work again. And so we had to play around a little bit with it, and we came up with a new approach. And so the new approach was actually to use a local variable and then run scripted events. So we started off by creating axis ranges. And for this, because we won't be rescaling, we're literally going to set a variable. But we did want a range definition because we're going to set up multiples. So since the prop lever is all the way to the top, you see minus 16,383. So I came here and I hit set. Then all I did was I barely moved it back. I wanted it to be right at the edge, and then I set the next value. So that makes it that in this tiny little spot, it will, and we created a new local variable which I called condition flow or condition follow. I didn't know what else to call it, so I called it condition follow. I made it a number, I made it 0 decimal places, and the initial value was always to start with 0, which is where it would be to start off with, and something's going to set it anyway. So we selected it as the item that we were going to change, and we made it a specific value. And similar to the end processing, you'll notice we use this one time. So once it gets into this range, it doesn't matter if these values get triggered 10 times. It's only going to do something once, and that's set the value to 3. So then I wanted it that just behind where we were with that, so starting about here, but coming way down to about here. Where were we? About 63. Yeah, so it was around putting the middle on the line here. And around there, I set that whole range again one time to change the condition follow to a 2. Finally, we set it up so that when going into the low and this very small range of 11,000 to 16,383, again, we wanted the condition follow to set a 1. And so with that, we now created 3 spots where we set a variable. Then what we did was we added a scripted event. So a scripted event is just now attached to this place as somewhere to be, and what it's going to do is follow this having a change of the event. So this script is going to run when condition follow changes to a value of 1. So on the change, it will run. Not really anything to do with the fact that the prop lever is moving. Now, this was all tricky and played around with to try to figure out how to make that throttle lever move like it does when you map it in the sim or physically move it in the sim. So with the 1, we wanted that when we were in the low position. So for the low idle position, we needed to set the throttle to 0. And ironically here, we can send the value because what's important is setting the value. We delayed 300 milliseconds, so long enough for that to set, and then we triggered a vJoy button. And again, very strange that if we put the same sim event command in place of this vJoy button, it will not trigger what we need it to do. It just won't. So, little strange, but we figured it out, and this makes it work. So one of my vJoy buttons, which I have hanging around, we used 113. Then what we did was for position 2, so when in the high idle, again, the scripted event for when it's at 2. Now we're setting the throttle to 4915, which is what the sim sets it to when it puts it in the high idle. Again, it would have been great if they just used the prop lever values. Probably everything would have just worked, but they did this weird thing they're doing, and they still use the throttle as the control. So very annoying. We delayed for 300 milliseconds, and we trigger that exact same event. So we need to trigger this same thing to do with the prop lever, but it has to be done in the sim, and it has to be the same thing being triggered again, not something different. Hence, it needs the throttle change and this done at the same time, and then it goes ahead and does what we expect. Finally, when we get it all the way up to the top, so when condition 3 happens, we're going to go ahead and set the prop pitch axis to 16,383, and when we do that, it will move over the gate. And so coming back across the gate, when we pull that back, it triggers session 2, which sets the throttle to 4915 and runs that vJoy button at the same time. So it just moves it over the gate, works perfect, not an issue. And then when we come down, it triggers that 1, which has us set the throttle to 0. But throttle to 0 alone wasn't enough. We needed to set the throttle and trigger the button to get the animation to move. One of the other little things that we still got going on down at the bottoms, when this pushes down into the cutoff position, we're still able to send fuel valve engine 1 parameter 0, and when we do that, that has the animation move, so it goes into the cutoff position for us and is not an issue. When we send when we take it out of that button, so because it's a detent, it's a button pressed when it's down. When you take it out of the detent, it's a button released. When we do that, we're still checking the variable of general fuel valve 1 is equal to 0, which it should be. Again, this allows us to sync up. So there, we're going to toggle it, obviously, because we need to toggle it, which moves the throttle, and we send the throttle 1 cut. That's going to make sure that it sets the throttle value to 0 as well. And then for our throttle, when it goes into its detent, which is number 24, what you've got there is, again, something we had to do with a vJoy. So now when the button's pressed, we're going to basically press and hold button 111. So it's going to be pressed, and when it's released, it's going to release that virtual joystick. So again, button 111. All right, so now that we've got all that taken care of, let's go back into the sim and show you what we had to do for our controls. So under our controls, you'll notice you've got these vJoys, and we've covered this before, but here's my vJoy, and you'll notice we've got a whole bunch of buttons attached to cameras for views and things. This is how I run my camera system. Works really great. I map those inside of the Stream Deck as well as buttons on control systems. Now, power management. So in the past, we also used buttons 120 through 122 to show how to do our condition lever controls. We used that in one of the videos. So here, what we've done with button 113 is we map that to propeller pitch high. Now I was playing around with propeller pitch low. This is not required. So we're going to clear it because we don't need this and just get rid of it. Then what you're going to see with the throttle is we were also playing around with, did I need to use throttle cut or not? So I did another vJoy button which I attached to it. So as you saw, we don't need this anymore. So I would have cleared this guy and validate it. So to make this work, we had to add first a button at 113, which we did for the propeller pitch high. That's the button that we trigger, and for some reason everything works exactly the way we need. Low actually flips it over on the throttle and sends it all the way to high, so we couldn't use it. So when we put the joystick in the down position for the throttle, so what I mean is when we do this into the detent. So what we end up doing is that on button press, we want it to send the decrease command so that it will trigger the throttle 1 decrease. Then what we're going to do is when we take it out of the detent, we wanted it to perform the cut. So when you look at this button, we did joystick button 111, but we used an on press event. And so we did that for the throttle 1 decrease, and so it's going to repeat because the Bravo and the way this button works, it just repeats. Then what we're going to do is on the throttle 1 cut, we're going to go ahead and we're going to release joystick button 111. And so that's how we got it so that we can go into reverse, and then when we come out of reverse and click into idle, it will pop the throttle back into idle, but you don't have to do the thing where you come out and give it a little bit and then go back to idle. You can just come out of the gate and you're good to go. And then for our throttle axis, work the exact same way. We picked our joystick axis X, and that is what we assigned. And in this case, I unchecked the throttle reverser. So this goes backwards, but that seems to be what the TBM needs. So we're happy. Everything works. And then when you're done, you got to make sure that you apply and save. So now that you've got those buttons assigned, that's how we've got it so that our throttle can go up, come down, go into reverse, come out of reverse, and then we can use our propeller to move ourselves into the low, into the high, and back over the gate. Well, with that, I'd say we're done, and it's time for me to hop in, get out of here, and get on my way. If you could, go ahead, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Come along with us on the next one. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.